Welcome. This is the Drupal usability meeting for June 7th, 2024. I'm Benji Fisher, moderating and sharing my screen. And also present are Andres Vankov, Offer Schall, Ralph Kohler, and Simo Helston. So we're going to start with this issue, number 3432471. Add an indication of disabled menu items when they are disabled because of their parents. And let's see, I have a test site set up. Let me share the link in the Zoom chat. And you can log in as usual as admin with the password admin. And I've already applied the patch to this site, so I think we can just go to menus. I always look at the administration menu because it's the biggest and most complicated. And if, say, I don't want to show display modes in the administration menu, so that would be under structure, display modes, and it has two children. So there it is, sort of in use. I could uncheck the enabled box. And then when I save the form, let's see what happens. What's new is this label disabled by parent that has been added to the two child elements. And now when I look at the structure menu, I no longer see display modes listed. Oh, and I see Thomas Hell has just joined us. Hi, Thomas. So before this issue, we added the disabled label to the thing we disable, but there's nothing added to the child elements until this patch. And as Ralph Kohler points out in the chat, yes, the enabled option is still checked for the child elements. So any questions about what this patch is doing? I don't see any questions. So yeah, I think Ralph brings up the obvious question, should we disable the child elements? I would say probably not, because the way it currently works, when we later change our mind and decide to re-enable the parent element, whatever choices we've made for the child elements will be saved. And there might be more than two. There might be lots of child elements, and we might want some of them displayed and some of them not. And we might want to keep that set of decisions. Go ahead, Ralph.
I agree to the perspective you've brought up, but my problem with it is basically me as a user, I would be confused. It's because those are mixed messages. On the left on the left column, on the menu link column, you have for example, form modes disabled by parent, while on the enabled column, you still have the enabled checkbox. So I ask myself, what does count here?
Okay. On the other hand, that confusion is already present before this, and perhaps adding the label is not enough, but it's probably a step in the right direction. Go ahead, Offer.
Yeah, I agree. I guess Benji with what you said and Ralph, but I think it's a great patch as it is. It adds clarity. We need to figure out what to do with enabled, but I totally see on projects I have a very extensive tree where sometimes the top tree one need to be disabled, and a lot of choices are made below that. And I would like the option to keep that um, all these selections, even that I disabled or enabled the top.
Okay, and you got a thumbs up from Ralph. I want to try one more thing. What happens when we um, disable the parent and also one of the children? What is the messaging then? Um, okay, so form modes is disabled, not just disabled by parent. I think that's the right behavior. I'd also like to point out that say we decide to disable the entire structure menu, which has a huge number of children. Um, and as in that case, as you scroll, um, now there's no indication on the screen that the structure menu is disabled. And this is, I think, where it's most important to have some indication when, for testing purposes, I chose this, which has only two children, but it's really most important when it has a lot of children. So let's see if I were to uncheck structure and save that. So now all of these are disabled by parent. Display modes is disabled by itself. Form modes is disabled by itself. Um, oh, and Offer asks in the chat, can you try to remove a disabled by parent item outside that parent? So I am expecting it to become enabled. I'm not sure what you're asking.
So if you take any of the items that are not disabled specifically, but because they belong to a parent that is disabled, they're disabled, like taxonomy here, and move it out of its parent, so
Oh,
it's not under one. I guess just to see that it's behaving as we're expecting.
okay. So when I move it, it still says disabled by parent, but it's also highlighted because it hasn't been changed. And then when I save, um, it is enabled. Um,
And
Go ahead.
yeah, I want to bring another suggestion because I think now with these new three words, perhaps we should create, if it becomes very overwhelming, the amount of text there. And what if there was, and maybe that's helping what Ralph was mentioning before, if we had another column, one column of what the user wanted to be, and the second column is how does it behave or something, whether it's because repeating disable parent for each one for like a whole tree that's being disabled is going to be very overwhelming. And it's like this. It's a great example here. You yeah, that's my thing.
Yeah, so I guess you bring up a great question about what happens when you move something around. Should it update immediately or only when it gets saved? Um, and yeah, I guess the other question is, how might we improve this? Would it be better to have all this information in a separate column rather than adding the same label over and over again? And Scott has joined us too since the last time I checked. Go ahead, Scott.
So yes, it should definitely update the label as soon as it's moved. If it becomes active, it should be updated. And the other way to do it, of course, would be to the actual enabled checkbox. That should be disabled. Wait, no, that means you can't disable it. If the checkbox is disabled by the parent, then the item would be disabled because you wouldn't be able to change it, right? The actual checkbox should change.
Yeah, I think that the way it currently works is correct, that this checkbox is still enabled. And whether or not the parent is enabled, you still have the choice for the child elements.
Mhm. Yeah, I see. I see that too.
Okay, so you would like to improve the patch by also changing whatever the indication is when we move something around.
Yeah, that definitely needs to change. It's on screen so people see it. And if it's somebody's using a reader, then that'll be red, right? Or
Let
silver.
me just check the current behavior when I disable show row weights. So now, oh, I was thinking of something else. This only shows the row weights. It does not make the hierarchy um, by a text box. The hierarchy is still just shown by indentation. Go ahead, Scott, or do you just still have your hand raised?
So I'll just raise, sorry.
Okay, Simo.
Yeah, one thing I think when we show it disabled by parent on the list, then I think it would make sense to have it the same information also on the edit form, which currently it doesn't.
Ah, so let's have a look at that. Okay. So we have this notice up here that this is, oh yeah, and then menu links are more complicated than they look. And this is, you can't change the title and you can't change the path, but you can enable it or disable it.
And it's also not included not even in the parent link's description. So that's kind of minimum. It could be mentioned at least at the help text that if the parent link is disabled, but no, it's not even there. But it would be nice to have it somewhere shown close to the enable menu link checkbox.
So this does show that the parent link is disabled, although I think if I look at something more deeply nested, so for example, suppose I were to re-enable display modes. Save that. And then if I were to edit view modes, so the parent is enabled, but the grandparent is disabled. Can you see the options when I click on this, or does Zoom not get that?
I
Yes.
can see it. Yeah.
Okay, good. Um, so yeah, so I think you're right, Simo. It would be good to add the information here. And were you suggesting that it be added to the help text here?
Then at least it would be close to the option that doesn't change, because so that it would be somewhere close to that checkbox that doesn't change anything if the parent is disabled. So it's kind of, it could be more prominent than the help text, but as if it's in the help text, it's somewhere that's kind of something we have already, and then it's close to that checkbox.
Right. I can't think of any other place to put it. Possibly under parent link. Well, maybe that's not a bad idea. I guess my first thought is to put it here, close to the enable menu like checkbox, but since it is related to the parent and grandparent links, this is another place we might put it. And Ralph, do you just want to make your comment yourself, or shall I read it?
I can quickly do. Was I not sure if it already mentioned, but I think in the list of in the select field for the parent link, at the moment only the actual disabled parents are labeled as disabled, but shouldn't the disabled by parent menu items also be labeled? Because that is also relevant information in case someone wants to move it, for example, as a submenu item of one menu item that's currently disabled by parent.
Okay, so if we were to add the same text, disabled by parent, that would help
But it's
people who want to change the parent link. It would also have the advantage that when this edit page first loads, we would have a visual indication right here in this select list. It would say display modes disabled by parent, and that would be an indication that whether or not you enable it, it's not going to be in the menu.
But the only downside I see is basically with your example right now, having the structure menu item disabled and all the submenu items, then you get more or less a wall of text, all those dashes, then the menu item label, and then the disabled or the disabled by parent is a lot of text and a lot of redundant text also. So that's the downside, but still it would be more explicit.
That's right. It's the same problem of no, too much noise that we have here. In a sense, it would be worse here because that select list is already problematic. On the other hand, if you're not opening this select list, then you'd see it only once. So in some ways it's better, in some ways it's worse.
Yep.
I think it would be nice to be if we could have some kind of a own visualization for those that are disabled, those branches that are disabled. So it's a bit hard to come by something that's usable for everyone, but some kind of background or something like that, kind of just marking visually that whole section that is disabled. But that's a kind of design thing.
So one option that I don't actually recommend, but it's just a thought, is that we could make use of these dashes and use an X rather than a dash for whichever parent item is disabled. That would have the virtue of not taking up any more room. It would display the information, but it would be sort of cryptic. I guess we have 2 dashes per level of indent, so if structure is disabled, we could make it dash dash XX, and then block layout could be dash dash XX dash dash. Go ahead, Ralph.
Talking about those dashes and the indentation, haven't we had an issue dealing with that particular problem a few months ago? I'm just searching.
At least we had one on the ending day of DrupalCon Prague, because I remember talking about those kind of markings while I was waiting at the airport. So we have had before at least kind of a year and a half ago.
Yes, there is a long-standing issue to do something about this list. I had forgotten that we had 2 dashes per level of indent, and I wonder if that has changed in the last year or two. So sort of the simplest change would be to add the disabled by parent message to this select list, and that has advantages and disadvantages as we've discussed. Simplicity is another advantage that would make it consistent with this. If we think that instead of adding it here, it should be a separate column, and maybe I'll go back to hiding the row weights. So that would presumably not be a checkbox. It wouldn't be any sort of form element. It would just be an information column. Maybe between the checkbox and the operations, a column labeled visible, and that would only be checked if the menu item and all of its parents were checked. Does that sound like a reasonable way to present the information? I get a thumbs up from Scott.
If the label is visible, does that mean if you know the direct link, you can access it? If the parent is is that disabled, or is it hidden from the menu? So is the route disabled, or is the route just not in the menu?
It's just not in the menu.
Yeah. So I think then that kind of that disabled can be sometimes misleading.
So you think that just the existing column label is misleading because it's not clear that it's the menu item rather than the link itself or the page itself that's enabled or disabled. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. So I think yeah, that's something because I'm so used to that. So it's I don't have a clear I don't know if it's misleading or not, because I know that there is difference, and for someone who doesn't know that it's if it's not enabled, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's kind of a doesn't. Yeah, I think this is a falls a bit into the Drupalism section, having the links and the especially when we're looking at the links that are by here defined by the system and not manually added.
Yeah, that's related to what I said at the beginning about how menu links are more complicated than they appear. So I think everything on this menu is provided by the system. They can all be edited. You can add children, and they have that reset option. as opposed to something like the main navigation menu. All of these are things that are added. They can be edited or deleted. Oh, they can't? Oh, that. Well, that's a bug. Uh, delete is in the wrong font. But articles and recipes, these are menu items that can be created or deleted. They're not provided by system in the same way. And Ralph found the issue he was talking about. Yes, we all remember this one. It is issue 238-4203. Improve indentation in hierarchical select lists. And maybe I'll just open the screenshot briefly. Shows various suggestions for how to indicate the indentation rather than what we currently have. Oh, and this before screenshot, confirms what I was asking. So when this screenshot was taken, there was only one hyphen per level of indentation. So that has changed. I thought so, but I think the screenshot confirms that. But anyway, back to the issue at hand. Shall we make a firm recommendation that instead of having this repetitive disabled by parent, again, it is most useful in the case where there are a lot of them, because that's when you scroll off and you don't see the parent anymore. It's scrolled off the top of the screen. It's most useful when there are a lot of them, but when there are a lot of them, it's a lot of visual noise. So do we want to make a firm recommendation that instead of adding all of that, we add a new column to the table? I get a thumbs up from Scott. All right, I can't. Does anyone prefer the way it currently works and think that having the separate column is a bad idea? Go ahead, Ralph.
Could you just repeat what the second checkbox column would be for? Because I think I've missed it while I was searching and was distracted.
So it would just be putting this same information in a separate column rather than adding it to the label.
Ah,
So we're not sure how to do it. The one suggestion I made was between these two columns, enabled and operations, to have another column called visible. It would not be a form element, it would just be an information column. And it would be a check mark, perhaps, if the element is enabled and all of its parents are enabled, and otherwise it would be an X or something. So go ahead.
just one thought and one comment. A +1 then for your suggestion in regards of that extra column. But one additional thought, something Simo raised in regards of signify disabled columns. Maybe even though it isn't completely accessible, of course, we shouldn't rely solely on color, but I'm not sure on which issue it was, but one Scott worked on where it was something about disabled views, I guess it was, and there some pink background was used, so maybe it might be some visual cue for at least sighted users to quickly figure out which of the rows are disabled, the actual disabled as well as the disabled by parent, and which are actually active and enabled. as an additional help.
Okay, so for example, actually that's not easy to give an example of. Go ahead, Thomas.
Um, I'm not sure. I like the idea of the separate column, but I'm not sure I like the idea of it being a check or checkbox or anything like that, because just for myself, historically, if there's something that looks like a check and I can't undo it, that drives me crazy. And I think that something's wrong or broken. I think the column makes sense, but I would go with something other than something that looks actionable. If
So
it solves
perhaps
the equation.
yes or no rather than a check or an X.
Yes, that that would be great if we wanted more information, like whether because we have those two states, we have both disabled and disabled because of the parent. If we're getting rid of that much information, maybe we want something that allows us to differentiate between whether or not it's not visible because it is disabled, but we can infer that from the enabled check being missing. So yes, no would be fine, or maybe we consider other things, but something that's definitely not actionable.
Okay, good point. Also in the chat, Simo says background pattern makes it harder to read, but has some benefits. / pattern. Scott, go ahead.
The label, the label for the new column would be more direct, like disabled, inherited, right? Just disabled by inherited. Directly disabled, or yeah, I'm just trying to think of how to shorten the title, or to have something more like a switch, a visually disabled switch. So, right, talking about yes and no, how to show it as a yes or no or on off. And if it's the inherited, right, just to shorten the phrase.
I think just inherited doesn't make the meaning clear enough.
Okay.
I think the combination of having the simple yes or no plus the information in the enabled column is reasonably clear. I mean, I guess that's a matter of opinion, but it certainly has all the information you need. Ralph replies about the readability of the background. He says, but for the pink background example, the color contrast was still more than 4.5 to 1 for the text color against the background. So I'm not sure if it would be harder to read. And then Simo comments, at least technically make the info available as classes for the theme CSS to use. Okay, so let the admin theme decide whether to use it, but it certainly does no harm to add a class to the row so that the admin theme can decide whether or not to do it. I think that's a good suggestion too. So are we coming around to consensus on the separate column as I described it? Get a thumbs up from Ralph and Thomas and Scott. Simo, go.
Yeah, I'm a little bit worried that it adds too much information, so it's kind of also making it less usable when it's when the menu is not using that. So it's kind of adding more information, so it makes the current options less usable because there is more. But maybe, yeah. But that's information that needs to be there somehow.
Well, it's adding the same information and I think it's doing it in a more compact form than what we're looking at now. I guess the difference is all these things that are not disabled by the parent, it's adding an extra yes here. So in that sense, it's adding more visual noise. Go ahead, Thomas.
Historically, I don't think I've ever had a site where I didn't have at least one thing disabled. And the fact that it's called out in a separate column, in theory, can make it more findable for me. So I guess I disagree with Simo about it being added noise, because I've not seen many sites where for some period of time I didn't have to disable at least one menu item.
Okay. And Aaron has just joined us. Welcome. Go ahead, Ralph.
And also another argument pro the extra column is, at the moment, having that disabled and disabled by parent within the menu link column added to the actual menu link label, you're mixing basically the title with the state information. And by moving that to a separate column, you have that column explicitly and clearly just about the state, while the menu link is clearly just about the hierarchy position and the label itself. So I consider that more clear.
Okay, there's separation of concerns, that the information isn't added to the link, and you get a thumbs up from Thomas there.
Yeah. So do we have, if it's a separate column, do we have possibilities to somehow connect the checkbox and the information only column, so that, because the checkbox box is also information, but it's kind of a contradicted by the other column. So somehow to have that kind of combined status somehow.
So I think the suggestion is that we would say yes in the new column only if the menu item itself were enabled and all of its parents were enabled. So in a sense, it is combining that information already. Does that answer your question?
And are we looking at placing the new column between or after enabled, so that it's kind of the like the final say on if you can see it or not? So it would, I think,
Okay.
make sense there.
Yeah, I think that's what I suggested, putting it in between the existing columns, so after enabled. And Aaron, just briefly to get you, oh, is Aaron? Yes, Aaron's still here. Just briefly to get you caught up, we're discussing an issue where if you disable a menu, then you add information to all of its children, indicating that they're disabled by their parent being disabled. So now let's go back to the question here. How are we going to present that information on the edit page for an individual item? So I guess we could go back to putting the information here in the help text. And I wonder if there is, anyway, if we're not going to be, let's see, if we're not going to be saying disabled by parent on this page, then we probably shouldn't add all of that text in the select list. Should we change anything in this area for the parent link to indicate that the parent or one of the ancestor elements is disabled, or should we just add some information, a second line of help text here? Go ahead, Ralph.
Aaron was first.
Thanks. Sorry, I was having audio issues, so I've just joined from my phone. And basically, I was thinking that I've had this idea for a while, inspired by our Drupal 7 CMS, where it would display like in the menu tree. This is a very custom implementation, by the way, but it would display little badges next to each menu item. For instance, showing the status of the content, whether it was published or unpublished, whether it was a new draft, and I wonder if this is an opportunity to sort of start to move towards a pattern like that. Because the nice thing is these badges can be color coded, which can help with sort of scannability. And it's a system that our content editors really liked, and so sort of tested well. So I wonder if it's a pattern that we could maybe look at. I'm not saying we have to do it on this issue, but if we keep in mind that that's maybe something that is a good idea, we could sort of move to a direction like that, I guess, would be what I would suggest.
Okay. So now go ahead, Ralph.
First, to Aaron's point, I like the idea in case those badges are sort of also screen reader accessible, communicating the meaning based on the form as well as on the color. And that would basically, could you move to the menu, to the page of a menu item, please, Benji? And that would basically, remove the need of those redundant, basically disabled or disabled by parent. And in regards, if we are adding a second column on that overview on the list page, I think adding the information if a menu link is visible or not, I wouldn't add to basically the description, but from an importance level, could you move please back to the other page? Yeah. Make it on an equal level to the an enable menu link setting, so that you see is the menu link enabled or not, and then another point, is that menu link visible or not, without the option to change anything there, but still in the description it might be missed.
So you're suggesting that we sort of add a sort of an information element, not a
Yeah.
form element, on the same level as enable menu link. And then there's the question of how much information to give there. It might be something like visible, yes, or visible, no, because the structure menu is disabled. Aaron, go ahead.
Thanks. Just a little bit more context there. So I was saying, so in the CMS that we have, the badges are displayed next to the menu title, so next to the title of each menu item, which and looking at that screen, so kind of like as it is there, but there's a bit more like horizontal spacing. There's more spacing between because they're badges. There's like just more space between the name and the menu item. So like visually, they don't, like in this, they're very close together, but visually that doesn't happen in our sort of CMS. So we have that sort of badge style. I guess from using that, from the experience of it, like it is. I do, again, maybe just because I'm used to seeing that pattern, but I do quite like it because I think with menu items being indented, it's nice to be able to see the title and the status of that item close together rather than having to scan across the columns, where which might work fine. I think that would work okay if they were all like, or all not indented basically. Like you have a view of content, we have it in columns, and that's fine because everything is nicely left aligned. Whereas here, the interface is a bit more, not everything is aligned to the left in the same way. But again, I might be biased because I'm just so used to seeing that kind of style with the badges. But from when it was tested in the past, that seemed to work well from what I understand, and users have enjoyed that pattern. So
Yeah, Aaron, Ralph asks, is the indentation level also communicated in the badge? And exactly where is the badge? Is it before or after the link?
So it's after the link, kind of like with how it is there disabled by parent, but obviously that text would be inside a badge, and there's slightly more space between the badge and the label, or the title. And to Ralph's question, is the indentation showable? I don't think so. No, it's just, so the badges are just like whether there's a new draft, whether the content is published. But there can be more than one badge on the same item, because content might be unpublished and might have a new draft. So you would get both of those badges. Not sure if that answers your question.
Yeah, and just to be clear, this information is available in the menu page as well as on the content page. This is sort of where I might more expect to have that. The moderated content.
Yeah.
But
In
you actually add it here as well.
Yeah, in our in the CMS, again, bear in mind this is a Drupal 7 CMS. The users only interact with content through the menu tree.
Okay.
And everything is on the menu tree. So this is effectively like it's an interesting idea because users actually have to add content to the menu tree before they can even save a new page. There's literally no way for them not to add content in the menu tree. But that's that. I'm not at all suggesting we go down that route, because that only works if your site is set up in the front end to support very deep menus, which we don't know what the front end of a site is like, so we can't suggest that. But yeah, I think if you have this information, are you saying, Benji, you would want like the disabled by parent? You would have also on the content view, or is that not what you're saying?
No, the disabled by parent applies to the menu item, so that belongs on this
Yeah.
page. But whether there's a new draft available,
Oh yeah, yeah. I think it's good to I think in Drupal what we don't do is we tend to send people to the content view a lot out of the box. And it's funny because I was just before I came here, I was just in the Starshot presentation that was happening. That's why I was late here today. And it wasn't talked about there at all, but I do wonder if that pattern of if we were to focus, make the menu tree, let's say, more prominent to users and make that the primary way that users interact with content, if that would be a better way, because there is some kind of I suppose it depends if your site is structured around a menu, though. That's the problem. We don't we don't know what sites are structured around. So we have to provide options. But if your site is structured around the hierarchy of a menu, then this kind of view does make sense for content editors, because they understand that structure and they understand where this page sits in the context, which you don't have when you're looking at it in the content view. You
Yeah,
don't have that hierarchy of context.
I think it's also a question of scale. If your site has dozens of pages, then it all fits in one
Yeah.
menu hierarchy. That works well. But if it has thousands of pages, they're not all going to be in the menu. And then you want to be able to filter and sort.
Yeah.
We are getting close to the end of the hour, so let's try to wrap this up. And Thomas has been waiting to say something.
I just wanted to point out that one of the challenges with what Aaron was describing is that there's not just one way to create the menu structure. And so, for instance, back in the day, I had a strong interest in using vocabularies to organize content and then using that to generate menus. And so I feel like we can't necessarily assume how the menu is created. And I don't know if we want to be so prescriptive. And I still feel pretty strongly about what Ralph brought up earlier about the separation of concerns. Like having information next to the link seems to be a very awkward place. I'm huge into sorting and filtering, and I would eventually like to be able to filter by what's been disabled or what's visible, what's not visible, even if that isn't part of this issue, by continuing to keep it next to or as part of the links. It eliminates that. So just want to put that out there. Thank you.
Okay, yeah, I don't think Aaron was suggesting that we force people to use the menus to look at their site content, but rather think of it as an option that we can provide.
Yeah, I think it, like I said, I think it can work if your site is structured hierarchically around the menu. But as I said, and as you said, Thomas, like we don't know. Drupal doesn't prescribe how you're going to structure your site.
Okay, so to wrap things up, so I guess we're going to make a recommendation, not just a suggestion, that instead of putting the label here, that we add a separate column. Secondly, that we add a CSS class so that the theme has the option of doing something additional, such as a pink background. Oh, and Scott mentions in the chat, I've had projects that use book for their menu structure. Yes. So I think those are the only suggestions for this page. And then for the edit page, to add an information, a text element, not another form element. And we haven't really settled on what to put there. So we can't make a firm recommendation about exactly what to say, but certainly some indication on this edit page of the same information that we're adding to the tree. Am I leaving anything out? Okay, I think I can do that unless someone else would like to make the comment. Okay, so we just have 1 minute left. I'll say again what I said at the beginning. Next week I'll be at a conference and I'll try to get away for an hour and run this meeting as usual. But don't be prepared to have a conversation even if I'm not here. But I'll try to be here.
We'll do our best, sir.
Thank you.
Have a good week if we don't.
Thank you very much. And hope to see you all next week or possibly in 2 weeks if I don't manage to make it.
Thanks, Benji. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks,
Anyway.
everyone. Have a nice weekend.
Bye.